Welcome to Harvard Business Review's The New World of Work. I'm Adi Ignatius, editor-in-chief of HBR. I just learned that that little guitar riff is also used by Axios for its live shows, so I feel like we're in good company. So each week on this show, I interview a CEO, a thought leader, somebody else to inspire and educate us on the changing dynamics of the workplace. Our viewers come from all over the world, and they work at everything from Fortune 500 companies to fledgling startups, from family businesses to nonprofits. The aim of this show is to provide insights for everyone as they navigate this transitional moment in how we organize ourselves in the business world. On today's episode, we have another great guest, Dov Seidman, founder and chairman of the How Institute for Society. So I'll come back in a moment for a proper introduction. But first, let's hear from our good friends at KPMG, sponsors for this season of The New World of Work.
At KPMG, it's our people who make the difference for our clients. Talented teams leveraging the right technology to uncover insights that illuminate opportunity. Ready to make the difference together?
If you're an HBR subscriber watching this, you can head to hbr.org/newsletters to sign up for the New World of Work newsletter, where I offer an inside look each week at these interviews and talk about some of the most interesting takeaways. And if you like content like this, please consider subscribing to our magazine and website. The address for that is hbr.org/subscriptions. And lastly, if you like hearing smart people talk about some of the same issues we discuss in this show, be sure to check out our flagship podcast, IdeaCast, available wherever you get your podcasts. And you can watch previous episodes of this show on YouTube or right here on LinkedIn and Facebook. So let's get on with it. My guest today, again, is Dov Seidman. He's the founder and chairman of the How Institute for Society, which is a US-based nonprofit that aims to elevate humanity by nurturing a culture of moral leadership, values-based behavior, and principled decision-making. He's the author of the book, Why How We Do Anything Means Everything. So we're going to talk today mostly about what good leadership looks like these days. Dov, welcome.
Thank you, Adi. You and I have been in a very long and meaningful conversation about the workplace and leadership, and it's nice to reconnect on your show.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love those conversations, and I love everything you think about. You know, you think deep thoughts, and let's try to bring some of those out now. So, let's dive right in. So let me ask you think a lot about the moral aspects of leadership. So let's dive right in. What does good leadership look like these days in this era that feels like one of perpetual disruption?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing good leaders do is they step back and try to make sense of the world in which they're leading. Leadership is not about headlines. We can all read those tweet to tweet, post to post. It's about trend lines. Where is the world going? What are the forces, familiar and unfamiliar, that are reshaping it? What framework are we going to use to pass judgment on the future? And what playbook are we going to use to enlist people on a journey to that future? And I'm also fond of saying that smooth seas have never created a great mariner, and the seas out there are not smooth. So if you're going to be a great leader, sailing the rough seas is part of it. So, Adi, what I thought I would do is first just say that leadership has always mattered. It's always been consequential. We're going to get into some examples of how leadership perhaps is more consequential than before because it reverberates. But we're leading at a time where everything has been disrupted, including leadership and authority itself. What it means to be in charge of an organization or a team or of somebody else is not what it used to be. And what I'd like to do, Adi, if it makes sense, is just frame what I think is the greatest 21st century leadership challenge. And then we can talk about what kind of leadership responds to it. Is that okay, Adi?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. I think your viewers and you would all agree that you cannot run a company, a team, a country without formal authority. People need to be in charge. I can't imagine a football team without a head coach, a school without a principal, a company without a CEO, or a country without a president or a prime minister. But we all know that organizations of human beings really work, and societies, when individuals with moral authority occupy these positions of formal authority. And in the less transparent, more opaque world, we often conflated the two. He must be a great man, or how did he get that high, or the board wouldn't put him there unless he was a great leader. But now we're seeing that formal authority could be seized. You could win it in an election. Somebody else could bestow it upon you. I hereby appoint you vice president. But moral authority is really a function of who you are, the values you embody, how you lead, how you make decisions, and how you relate to others. So, the challenge before us now that in this era of disruption, we're seeing that formal authority has been disrupted. Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, even with 20-to-1 supermajority shares, are not hanging on to their jobs if they're not leading in an enlightened way, or even worse, there's some misconduct. And we're seeing formal authority get toppled and disrupted in every sector of society. So the challenge is, how do we nurture and develop a culture of moral leaders who lead with moral authority? That's step one. And how do we ensure that they're the ones calling the shots, in charge, in positions of formal authority? And I would add that the legacy of the pandemic, when it comes to leadership, if you will, is that it has revealed and illuminated all the ways that moral leadership matters, not just at the very top. A school principal, a barista at a Starbucks, a store manager, at every level of organizations and sector and dimension of society, leadership matters, because especially in times of crisis, when people are naturally uncertain and scared, they turn to anybody who has some authority over them. And what they expect from them is truth, some wisdom, some selflessness, and really putting the other first. They expect moral leadership, Adi.
All right, that's a great framing. And by the way, if you're watching this, if you have questions for Dov, put them into the chat. I'll try to get to audience questions later.
Yeah,
So you use the term moral.
yeah,
Often people who write for HBR, who are in our world, they tend to use terms like, that good leaders are empathetic, they're
yeah.
vulnerable, in addition to having the kind of the business savvy that you need. But you use the term moral. Can you talk a little bit of, what you mean by that and why that is your central framing?
What I don't mean by it is moral leadership is not about moralizing, becoming moralistic, or becoming an expert, if you will, on how to wrestle with moral dilemmas, or how to take a stand on a social, political, environmental, religious issue, even though it might include that. Moral leadership is really about the how you lead, how you make decisions. Is it cost benefit analysis, or is it guided by principles? Are you willing to do inconvenient, courageous, and difficult things because that's what principle or values require of you? It's really about how you relate to others and have conversations. Is it one way or two way? It's how you end a meeting. Do you say, we've had a great conversation. Whose call is it? Oh, it's a marketing decision. Who's got the marketing budget? That's framing it in terms of power. Whose call is it? What about asking, what's the right call? What do we think is the fair call? What's the call that honors and is in fidelity to our values? So there's a whole playbook that I'd like to get into, but for now, let me just say it's not about moralizing. It's really about the how you wield power, how you make decisions, how you behave, um, and really kind of what you embody in terms of your own values. And maybe, Adi, we can bring this into what HBR viewers are all struggling with. Adi, you've written a lot in HBR about the behaviors and qualities that we need more of in order to succeed in the workplace. So why don't you name some, Adi, if I could put you on the spot? In order to win today, what are some of the behaviors that we want from our colleagues and teammates?
Yeah. Okay. Well, trust. Um,
Trust. Okay, I'm going to write these down. Trust.
okay. Let's say. Well, I talked about before. I talked about things like empathy, like vulnerability,
Yeah.
um, commitment.
Uh-huh.
You know. Look. We're not talking about individual contributors. We're talking about teams and companies. So kind of a shared commitment. A sense of team. Feel free to add to those.
And
Those are a few.
these are not nice to have. This is what you figured out kind of is essential today. So something
Yes.
you didn't just say efficiency and productivity and speed. You're calling for human qualities. So I think moral leaders are very much attuned to the distinction that I call between shifting behavior and elevating behavior. Because leadership is about the how we get people to do things, how we generate energy in them, how we enlist them in journeys and missions worthy of their dedication and loyalty. So if I were to put a product on sale, I could get you to buy now and not later, or more, not less. If we create a great political attack ad, I could get you to vote left, not right, or right, not left. We know how to use carrots and sticks to shift or nudge behavior. And if you give me enough carrots and sticks, I could get you to work faster, maybe have fewer sick days, work 10 hours and not 8. But the behaviors that you asked for, Adi, no amount of carrots and sticks can get you, because this is human beings acting and behaving in their most elevated way. Can you imagine saying to somebody, go in a room and don't come out or you'll be fired? If you can't come out with empathy and the ability to engender trust in the other, or you find more courage in being vulnerable, there are no amount of carrots that can coerce people into these behaviors. Well, let's try bonuses and no amount of sticks. Let's try carrots. If you tripled everybody's salaries, Adi, would you get more empathy? Would
You
you
would
get
not.
more trust?
Probably
You
not.
might kind of get the opposite. So we find ourselves in a discontinuous moment in leadership where what we want in and out of people, no amount of carrots and sticks can get us. Now, I'm not against sticks. There should be fireable offenses, but should the fear of being fired animate 2% or 98% of how things happen around this place? I'm really for carrots too. I think we should pay our colleagues as much as possible and hopefully more than our competitors. But what moral leaders understand is that certain behaviors cannot be coerced, they cannot be motivated, they can only be inspired. And I think moral leaders are inspirational leaders because trust, empathy, vulnerability, collaborating, honesty, courage, all these human elevated qualities that we aspire to see in those around us must and can only be inspired.
So,
And moral leaders understand the difference. We're seeing this play out in Return to the Office. Moral leaders know if you were my subordinate, Adi, I could insist, never lie to me, always tell me the truth. But I could never insist, always be loyal to me. So moral leaders know that certain things they can insist on, and other things they have to inspire. And we're actually seeing this play out with who's insisting that people come back to the office and who's trying to inspire it.
um, so everything you say is, I think it's great and is inspiring. Um, but I do want to ask, leadership paradigms do shift, and in the past it was more of a whatever command control. I'm the boss. I say you do. We're in an era now where everything we've been talking about, where we want the empathetic leader and the vulnerable leader and all that. It's possible there'll be another turn of the wheel before long, and there's another leadership paradigm. But my question for you, everything you say is seems solid, seems inspiring. How do you know is there science, or is there, this is a very HBR question, is there science or are there metrics to show that this approach to leadership not only is right in some 30,000 foot moralistic definition, but that in terms of outcome and performance for an institution?
So let's get into the science and metrics. But before we do that, here's what's not going to change. There's only two types of behaviors. There's what you can and can't do, and what you should and should not do. I believe that, Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said there's a difference between doing that which you have a right to do and that which is right to do. We used to specify to people, here's what you can and can't do. And then we asked them to pursue goals and strategies mindful of what they can and can't do, as fast and as ambitiously, and they had to outcompete on that basis. And in that world, the few, a military general would say, take that hill. A CEO would say, this is our strategy, these are our goals. And in that world, everybody's job is to do the next thing right. I think the way the world is working today, where we want more and more people to not just do the next thing right, but to do the next right thing. And that shift, I don't think, is ever going back. From asking people to do the next thing right to inspiring them to do the next right thing. Computers can be programmed to do the next thing right. Only a human being can do the next right thing. And I think that we are now in a normative environment. Normatives as in norms, what you should and should not do. And moral leaders get out of bed to foster normative cultures where people are should-minded. And that, I think, is here to stay. And the reason there's such an obsession with culture is corporate culture was invented, all culture was invented to transmit norms from one generation to the others. Norms as in what we ought to do and should do. You don't need culture if you're just going to specify the rules and the policies and the procedures, but you need to be deliberate and intentional about scaling values-based cultures if you're going to be normative. And I just wanted to say that as a way of saying, I don't think this is a fad. I think the world has been reshaped in ways to put us in a normative environment. We're seeing that in society, in community, and in companies.
So I think that's true. I think there's also a counter though, and maybe this is just high level political counter, but I feel like historians will look back at this era and define it perhaps as one of renewed autocracy, a move away from some of the ideals that you're talking about. Does that strike you as accurate?
So you remember I said that leadership is about trend lines. Let's step back. Can you name an autocratic mayor succeeding in terms of how his or her city is being led? Can you think of an autocratic CEO running a Fortune 500 company? Can you think of a championship won in basketball, baseball, soccer, World Cup soccer? Name the sport in the last 10 years kind of run by a command and control, screaming kind of that top-down coach. So autocracy is asserting itself or reasserting itself, I think, in national politics, where a dictator still has his hands on the levers of the military and ability to engage in propaganda, etc. And I think there's an epic battle between Putin's autocracy and Zelensky's moral leadership. But if you also step back, I'm seeing some wonderful trends towards moral leadership in so many other more local sectors and dimensions of our lives. And I think the reason I brought up sports is about winning. It's about becoming a champion. And it's incredible who's winning in sports. I mean, Steve Kerr with the Golden State Warriors had great talent, but so did his competitors. He had such a bad back one year that he missed 43 games. He wasn't even there to do the coaching, and they did it through a trust-based culture. Jill Ellis, when she was winning champions as coach of the American women in soccer, she knew the names of the dogs and cats of every one of her players. And that's just a symbol of how personal her coaching began. And I can give you, you had Greg Berhalter on your show, and the U.S. men's team has been incredibly successful in the last World Cup and aiming to eclipse that in the next one. But it was, if you listen to how the players talked about what they built there, it was an identity forged in unity. And even though they're a very young team, they tried to outcompete by outbehaving the competition through qualities of boldness and resilience, etc. And I have more examples, but I'm pretty positive about some large trends here.
So I like the questions that you threw out rhetorically about, name a CEO or a coach or,
Yeah.
others who are succeeding, who don't have aspects of morality and leadership. For people who are watching this, if you can come up with some examples, put them in the chat. It'd be interesting to see if people come up with it. When I asked though about, is this the era of autocracy or whatever, part of it is, it seems that leadership at a certain level, political leadership at least, no longer feels shame. And that, I mean, I'm old enough that I remember Richard Nixon, and Nixon was accused, was impeached, and clearly he felt shame. And that, at that point he decided, I need to step down. I'm not sure today's political leader feels shame. And if they don't feel that, then you open the door for, untruths, rival truths, just no sense of responsibility, of morality. And I worry about that. I worry that that has been a successful model for some political leaders, and that it could inspire others to try to follow that.
Adi, I think that's a very serious worry. When you mentioned President Nixon, when he said, I'm not a crook, he didn't want us to think that he's a crook. And whether he was a crook or not, he was celebrating the norm. Let's not be crooks. I believe that we are now living in this era of impunity, where some people in power are not just misbehaving, they're doing it with impunity. And impunity takes out and erodes the norm. So not only are we getting the harm that people in high places are causing through their conduct or nefarious conduct, if you do it with impunity, say, my words are perfect, I do it again, or they make the rest of us feel that we are somehow losers for wanting to live up to high standards and norms of conduct, then you erode the norms. But that's an argument for why we need moral leaders, because moral leaders safeguard norms. and they help create organizations and communities that are really there to be in fidelity to high norms. When Kanye West, right before his divorce with Adidas, he said horrific things and hateful things online. Whether he meant it or not, we could debate, but he said them. But then he said one more thing: "There's nothing Adidas can do to me," and that's a statement of impunity. And Adidas took a several billion-dollar hit in the end of the day by fighting against that, by severing that relationship. So we're seeing this battle of not just misconduct, but misconduct with impunity and those standing up to it.
So when I think of the moral leader, in some ways, I think about somebody who leads by example, who, when it,
Yeah.
just sort of does the right thing, and you realize this person is trustworthy, is upright, is inspiring. It's a new world now for leadership. We've talked about this in previous shows, where there is this inescapable imperative for leaders, for CEOs to respond to social and even political issues that lap up against their company, or sometimes are separate from it, but employees, customers demand to know where a leader stands. And by the way, if there isn't an overt statement, employees and customers will assume and fill the sentence for you. So you might as well sort of take a stand. This is tricky territory, and I'd love to know your thought on: is there a framework for how a leader manages this sort of new world of perpetual kind of social issues that they're asked to somehow declare on?
So, and I'm going to date maybe you and me, in the movie The Graduate, the Dustin Hoffman character was said, the future is plastics.
Yep.
You just used the word, Adi, which is the future. It's frameworks. All human judgment is framework dependent. And the prevailing framework in business is cost benefit analysis. There's been a framework that we've used, cost benefit analysis. And now we need to create and scale new frameworks that are normative. I believe the world is so interdependent, where the hopes, dreams, plights of one person, are showing up viscerally and visually in tiny screens in our hands. I mentioned Kanye West. After his divorce with Adidas, he showed up in the lobby of Skechers, and before Skechers knew it, they were involved in a social maelstrom of how to respond to his appearance there. One thing I know for sure, that the world has been reshaped in ways to fuse it: social, environmental, political, human issues. Call it what just happened with the Supreme Court with abortion, or how to respond to the invasion of Ukraine. These issues that were once deemed tangential to the business agenda are now inescapably part of it. Neutrality is over. There is an expectation to have a point of view, especially from employees and consumers and other stakeholders. And we need a framework for that. Pfizer has a great framework. Sally Sussman has spoken about it publicly. Does it align with our purpose? Given our values, what should our point of view be? How does it impact our constituents? And what would the price be of our silence? Tom Wilson has done a great job at Allstate with his framework. There's a threshold question: is what's going on legal? But even if so, given our values, what should our point of view be? And then if not, let's continue to challenge these ideas. But I think taking a stand is now something that you don't just get to say, hey, I just run a business. The business of business is business. I think the business of business is society, it's community, and how we relate to whatever comes our way, and how thoughtfully and principled we are is now the new expectation. I mean, Thanksgiving dinner is coming in a few months, and employees are going to sit there and run into their cousins that they haven't seen in a long time. And in the end of the day, a CEO has to ask herself this question: are my colleagues going to be proud at Thanksgiving dinner to brag to their cousins about how their company handled this issue and that issue and this issue and that issue that is now part of their business agenda? We have to pass that Thanksgiving dinner test.
Yep, I love that. I also love kid, the future is in frameworks. So I want to go to an audience question now. This is from Srinivas in India. We've had a couple of questions come in, not surprisingly, that are AI related or generative AI related. So this question is, in an era now where artificial intelligence may be better at making decisions based on data than humans are, can we say that the time has come for conscience based management or leadership?
Yeah. So listen, 500 years ago, we had the scientific revolution. And that was a true revolution. Uber putting yellow taxi cabs in or out of business, you know, uh, LinkedIn maybe making it harder for recruiters. Those are disruptions, but true revolutions happen about every 500 years. And I think the technological revolution and the scientific and the revolution that's being accelerated through AI is an every 500-year revolution. And 500 years ago, we looked around and we wanted to be in charge of our surroundings. And we said, we're the smartest. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. It was 500 years of revenge of the nerds. And we called it the era of enlightenment and reason. And we pretty much organized our affairs by being the smartest. And it's incredible what we achieved. Modern capitalism. We proliferated individual rights, biodiversity. It's incredible what was achieved in the last 500 years. But what's interesting about AI is it has challenged our monopoly on intelligence. We're no longer the smartest. So what's the one thing a machine will never have, which is a heart? And I actually think the technological revolution is putting into stark relief and focus the imperative to scale that which comes from the heart. There's an adage of moral leadership that only that which comes from the heart enters the heart. From an economic standpoint, in the industrial age, we hired hands and we hired strong hands. Then we went into the knowledge or information economy and we hired heads and we favored knowledge and expertise and specialization. I think we're going into a more human age where the qualities that emanate from the heart, like the ones you mentioned, empathy and the ability to do the right thing and our capacity for ethics and morality and conscience, to use the word that is now something we're going to have to scale. And what worries me, Adi, when social networks were first launched, we had some utopian thinking. Anything that connects the world is going to be great. We will have richer human experiences. Individuals will be empowered. And in the first innings, we saw pictures of dogs and cats, and we were able to. Our acquaintances became close friends again. But then we started to see that technology is a force for good and bad. And good things can happen and harmful things can happen, including democratic elections being hacked. We saw that we are not just organically divided, but the profit motive has become behind division, and people are now pitted against each other, and we're being actively divided through technology. And those in charge back then often said, we're just technology. We're just a platform. They proclaimed their moral neutrality. And I think, Adi, more important than anything now, given that we cannot afford with ChatGPT and generative AI to say it's just technology. We know that good and harmful things are going to happen. Some people are talking about the possible end of humanity. So the need for Spider-Man ethics, that with great power comes responsibility, has never been more important. And I think those who are purveying these new technologies have unprecedented power, and they're going to need to scale conscience and Spider-Man ethics.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So Dov, we've been talking mostly about morality and leadership at the sort of highest level, that good leaders
Yeah.
have it, and people who are selecting good leaders should look for that. But this is a question from Shabana from Islamabad in Pakistan. It's really, what role do you think leadership development can play in ensuring that individuals throughout an organization embody the same moral values?
So one is that's a great question. Moral leadership. There's an opportunity to build capacities, not skills, but qualities and capacities. And I think organizations can do that. And I think there are some practices that we need to scale of moral leadership. And I'm happy to mention a few. Would that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. So I want to start with the most counterintuitive practice and piece of advice. I think everybody on this gathering would agree that the world's accelerating. It's always on. We're being digitally assaulted. We all experience FOMO, fear of missing out. Fair enough, Adi?
So far, so good.
So I want to say the following. The faster the world gets and the more that comes at us, the more we need to pause. The hallmark of moral leadership is the pause. Emerson said that in the pause, I hear the call, because only when we pause can we even ask ourselves important questions that a moral leader would ask. How would I feel like if I were treated this way? What's the consequences of doing it this way or that way? And the pause, I like to talk about the 4 R's, because in the pause, we can reflect on the challenge, the situation, or the world in which we're operating. We can reconnect with our deepest sense of purpose and our values and conscience. We can rethink some of our assumptions of how we're operating, how we're making money, how we're making decisions. And only then can we reimagine a better solution or a better path or a better future. So the hallmark of moral leadership is the pause. Moral leaders also eschew philosophical mistakes. People think, oh, moral leaders must be about empowerment. Well, that's true spiritually, but often empowerment, you know what happens? This is how a non moral leader might sound. I push decisions to the front lines, I delegate authority, and they think they're leading. And then 5 years later, everybody has all these rights. I could spend $1,000 without asking my boss for permission. I could get on an airplane to a trade association meeting and spend money without asking for permission. And you've built a culture where everybody knows what rights they have. They're empowered in that way. But you haven't built a gym where they know the ethos. What is the way here? Where they know what is right. So I really think that's Brian Chesky recently came out against this form of empowerment and said that he wants to be an orchestrator. Moral leaders don't just get out of the way and delegate, they show up and they sit at the back of the room sometimes. They don't provide the answer, they ask the right questions. So there really are opportunities to be incisive and rigorous about what it is and what it's not.
So, Doug, we're a little over time, but I want to ask you one more question, and maybe it's just a quick exchange.
Yeah.
But you've kind of identified the hallmarks of moral leadership. I'm curious if as you look out at U.S. companies, global companies, are many of them, most of them, run by people you would consider moral leaders, or the opposite, just a few? I mean, w- you
Yeah.
know, what do you see out there?
So, two things. I think what matters is not to look for beacons. I've seen, I've never seen a unicorn, but I've seen a horse, I've seen a horn, I've seen white. I look who's engendering trust by extending it. Who's creating such a high trust environment where people feel that they can lean and take risks in order to innovate. Most innovation programs fail because trust is so low that people won't take the risk in order to innovate. So I look not for perfection. And I think what matters most, Adi, is not who's a beacon and an icon of moral leadership, but who is authentically and deliberately on the journey, who's taking risk in that regard, who's being courageous in that regard. It's not about perfection in that way. And maybe I should end with the following. Um, Linearity is over in this world. We're in an up and down world. And the leaders who frame the future as a journey really elevate others, because nothing elevates a human being more than being on a journey of progress where we go up and down, but we stick together. And increasingly, I'm seeing people have the confidence and the courage to frame that path ahead as a journey, develop an ethos for being on a journey together. I can mention some if you want, but I really think that nothing elevates somebody else more than framing the path ahead as a journey and creating an ethos where together we can journey together. Because the journey is to do something human.
Dov, that's fantastic. I think your words are inspiring. I think, judging from the comments and the questions we've had, that, our viewers feel the same way. So, I could talk, another hour or two
Yeah.
about this, but I really appreciate you being on the show
Can
and
I say
for
one
sharing your
last
thoughts.
thing?
Yes, you may.
Can I say one last thing?
Please.
Since we're trying to, did you ever hear in business, hope is not a strategy?
Yeah.
Yeah, through budgeting, planning, and control, we're going to superimpose the future. And that's hope is not a strategy. Well,
Yeah.
I'm also here to say that without hope, there is no strategy. Moral leaders purvey hope, and they inspire hope in others by really helping them see possibility, helping them embrace the commonality in the other so that we can do things together. So moral leaders really fight against the non-adage that hope is not a strategy, because they know that without hope, there is no strategy. And they're prepared to paint a picture of a distant future, but with rigor, go that way. I want to apologize for not answering your question before about metrics. I'm just going to say the following. Metrics are moral choices. When we measure something, we're saying it matters. When we don't measure something, we say it doesn't matter. So moral leaders pause and they pick the right metrics that move them on the journey, because they know that metrics they don't come from on high. In of themselves, they reflect our values.
All right. Dov Seidman, thank you for being on the New World of Work.
Adi, great to be with you.
All right. All right, that was Dov Seidman, and what a great discussion about what contemporary leadership can and should look like. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Just a reminder, you can watch previous episodes of this show on YouTube or right here on LinkedIn and Facebook. Now, my guest next week, and this will be our season finale. So this is Thursday, not Wednesday, but Thursday, September 28th at 12 noon Eastern Time, will be Jason Beekle, the CEO of Whole Foods. He's been at Whole Foods for 10 years and became CEO just last year, taking over from co-founder John Mackey. So we'll be talking about the challenges of taking over from a larger-than-life executive and about how Whole Foods is coping with changes in the business environment, with climate change, with the hybrid work challenge, and more. So if you're an HBR subscriber watching this, head to hbr.org/newsletters to sign up for the New World of Work newsletter, again, where I offer an inside look each week at these interviews and talk about some of the biggest ideas that come out of them. And again, if you like content like this, why not subscribe to our magazine and website? The address is hbr.org/subscriptions. And finally, we want to thank again our friends at KPMG, sponsors for this season of The New World of Work. Thank you all for tuning in today. I'm Adi Ignatius, and this is The New World of Work.